right, fellow Film School for Marketers, welcome back to the FSM Podcast. We are on episode number 33 now, and I am your host, Mr. William Schultz, the lead video sales and marketing consultant at Impact. I'm joined by the brilliant Mariah Anderson today as well. And today we have an awesome guest on. We're actually talking about the cost and the benefit of different categories or tiers of sales and marketing videos. With us today, we have Mr. Hector Cortez. He's done everything from shoddy little $500, $5,000 videos all the way up to large agency level videos for agency clients. And actually, Hector, before we even get started, can you just give us a bit of a snapshot into your history and what you've done in the past and where you are today?
Yeah, of course. So straight out of college, I was one of those guys that picked up a DSLR, really got into content, figuring out how to make it myself. Realized early on that I had an eye for it. So the first thing I kind of went and did is connect with businesses that are looking for content and seeing how I can develop my skills while also helping businesses grow their market share and what they're doing and getting in front of their customers. So in college, started up a company called Hecco, basically producing content from $5,000 to $15,000 range, working with medium-sized businesses to help them tell their stories, talk about their products and their services. From there, I jumped into a startup where I focus mainly on content marketing to help grow our user base. So utilizing a ton of video, a ton of animation, a ton of digital assets to help grow our audience and our consumer base. And then from there, recently joined Thru Productions and Post, which is a video production company that's been around for about 35 years in the Minneapolis Twin Cities area that mainly focuses on high-end advertising videos for TV broadcast, working in partnerships with some of the largest agencies in the world.
I think Thru is such an interesting model of a company because you're a video production company that sort of partners with agencies to make really cool content for your clients or for the agency's clients, excuse me. So can you talk a bit about where Thru has come from and what you see sort of changing in that world as the agency model sort of continues to shift with the rise of the new decade and what's been changing in the world of video and sales and marketing?
Yeah, 100%. So Thru's model kind of came about in the early 60s, late 70s, where you did have these larger creative agencies that were coming up with the concepts. But because of barrier to entry in the video world, you really couldn't specialize in the creative and the production at the same time. So where these kind of companies emerged was, hey, you give us a roadmap of what you're looking to make. And because we're the experts in the production side, in the cinema side, and the director, DP, lighting, grip side, where there's a lot of barrier to get into it, we were the vessel to basically getting those ideas done in a very high-end, polished way, so that brands and agencies could produce their vision ultimately, and then having that being broadcasted at the highest level on TV. So that's kind of that's kind of the inception point of Thru and kind of the era it emerged from. From there, it's kind of adapted over time where we still very much work with advertising agencies, and we're kind of the custom home builder in the sense that the agencies are coming with the plan and we're just executing their vision. But as you said, kind of the ebb and flow of the industry, companies such as ourselves are now actually working a lot more with direct client because the client kind of has a vision and idea and we can help them execute that.
I have a question for you, Hector, in terms of kind of what's changed for you in terms of working with clients. So since that barrier to entry in terms of producing video content has made it easier for people on their own to take that in-house and start to do it, talk to us a little bit about, what your thoughts are on companies maybe not having as high of production value in creating content versus investing in something that's of higher quality.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, a bit of my experience at Hecco, the production company I owned, smaller scale, for about 5 years. That entire world, operated in a budget that was a lot lower than what I'm working with at Thru. And the biggest difference between the two, I'd say, is that at the drive-through production size, the kind of companies we're working with, they're pushing out these pieces of content to massive audiences. So you're talking like million plus eyeballs are on these pieces of content. Sometimes they're played during very high-end shows or TVs, or even Super Bowl. We've done some Super Bowl content. So it's really it's made for a company that is going to get a ton of eyeballs on these pieces of content, and it's very, very vital for them to get it absolutely perfect. And they can't waste any seconds. And even just how the deployment of this content works from this traditional sense is that there's the 60-second spots, there's the 30-second spots, and now you're kind of getting into 15-second pre-roll type things as well. But for these larger companies, they come to drive-through because they need a premium polished product that aligns with their high-end, high-tier brand that they've created over 50 plus years. So it is very specific to a larger kind of company, and frankly 100% overkill for anyone that's operating in a different size business, and that's just a fact. I have a ton of clients that I had from Hecka. For example, I won't name drop because I haven't really got permission, but a ton of clients here locally that we produced really great pieces of work with a lower budget that worked really well for their space, because they weren't going to be putting $1 million of ad spend behind their content, but they were very interested in getting their message out to the local area that they operate in. Yeah. So, for example, some restaurants that do pretty well in this region want to get in front of their customers, but they really don't have 100,000 plus to spend. You can still get a really great product that works for that space.
Yeah, Hector, I think that's a really cool point you just made there, is deciding really what the trade-offs are when you're dealing with a $100,000 budget versus a $50,000 budget versus like a $5,000 budget. For a lot of our listeners, I don't think they're able to differentiate really the deliverables or the difference in dynamic of what happens on those shoots, or like the number of people involved. Could you speak a bit to the trade-off of an organization that maybe needs like both of those types of videos at certain points? Like, what's the real difference between like a $5,000 video versus a $100,000 video? And when do you think it makes sense to use each of those options?
Yeah. So specifically on the high tier side, you're really looking at creating content that's around very, very important messages. So for example, if you're a car maker and you have a new model coming out, and this is the first time you're introducing it to the market, that would be an ideal situation where you want to go as high end as you can. You want to make sure that you're showing all the cool features, all the great things about that vehicle, and you're getting people excited about it. So kind of like the hero or flagship video for different products. That's where it pays a bit more, and there's more ROI when you're introducing very important things. Now, to counter that, if you're doing training videos or you're doing a small tutorial on how to do roofing tiles or something, for example, there isn't really a need to overspend on that, because it's a very niche piece of content that's going to a very specific type of consumer, and you can sacrifice production there because the ROI most likely wouldn't be there, and it really just comes down to where is it cost effective to put more of your funding into high end stuff, and where it's cost effective to create more content that's not as high end but still really valuable to a customer.
So I love that insight, Hector. I'm curious what you think the real benefits are of a lower budget video. Like, what are the pros of going into a video and having a lower budget? What do you think people get out of those that they may sort of miss on the commercially sexy higher budget film?
Yeah, 100%. The real value in lower end production, I can kind of pinpoint in a couple things. So velocity. You can crank out a video in 10 minutes that goes really in depth about what you're trying to talk about and can be consumed really easily, created really easily, deployed really easy, and consumed really easy. Whereas on the higher end, you're looking at about a 45 day cycle from conception to creation to edit to, and then deployment can take even longer time. So really it's velocity is where you're gaining a ton of value. You can say more things quicker to an audience that you're looking to talk to, where again, on the high end, there's this very long process because there's a lot of refinement and polishing that needs to be done to get it to that level. So if you're looking to get a message out quickly, and multiple messages out for that matter, you can create really quickly, deploy it really quickly, and talk about more things at a faster pace than with any higher end production. On top of that, from a knowledge perspective, this higher end tier of video content really requires specific skill sets and very specific disciplines. Where, let's say for lighting, there can be an entire department with 10 people that are literally just focusing on lighting to make sure that the image looks as good as it can. And then you go into audio where you have the best audio people focusing on voiceovers, making sure there isn't any weird noises or background or things like that. And then you have, the best DPs, which are shooting the best kind of angles and content and images that they can. So there's a lot of hyper focus in each specific skill set, where on the low end, it doesn't have to be overly complicated, and you can just pull out your phone and do a selfie video. And you don't have to go super in depth with some of those things. And oftentimes it's pretty forgivable because technology has improved to where it kind of splits the difference on not having really good lighting. Your phone will do half of the work now for you. So you can get away with things that you couldn't have in the past.
Yeah, I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on, so obviously we've talked about how the clients that you're working with these higher budget are obviously bigger brands, bigger companies, much higher tier than like a local roofing company or something who can get away with a lower budget. But do you think the way that we are consuming content and how much video plays into our lives day to day in social media and other aspects, that it is going to be more forgiving for these larger brands to come across maybe a bit less polished? Like, do you see us going down that path in any way, or do you think that there's really no?
Yeah, 100%. And it's something we've noticed here too, is that in the past you'd have a lot more budget for some of these larger tier 1 videos, but now that's kind of getting split amongst tier 1, which is us, and then tier 2 or tier 3, which are going to be more of the social pieces, more of the casual stuff. I was on TikTok the other day and I saw Pepsi as one of the ads, which is a very high-end brand. I'm sure everyone's heard of Pepsi, but it was clearly shot on an iPhone, and where they kind of put more of their energy was the content itself. So they had a really nice, professional dancer on there doing his thing with some good music. But really, it looked a lot more similar to user-created content versus what you'd see on a Super Bowl ad. So I think absolutely, like the industry has kind of changed as far as you need to be putting more out there, and you can't be spending 45 days on every piece of content. You should be creating, some easier, quicker content out there so that you can stay top of mind and be part of the conversation at large. It really has changed. And I don't know if anyone's figured it out, the perfect balance, the perfect mix. One piece of the higher end production, which is a little bit more, it's not something that people really think about as often, but brand perception and, where companies want to position themselves. You think of like a Mercedes-Benz. There's a ton of value in them producing higher end content because they want to continue to establish that, hey, we're a very luxurious brand and we can afford this kind of content. And there's more of a wow factor. And that coincides with who they are as a brand. So that's why you're not seeing companies just completely stop and just posting Instagram videos like those Mercedes-Benz or, Delta Airlines. There is a ton of value in keeping that status.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to see what that shift continues to look like in terms of percentage, because like you said, I don't think there's some magic formula right now. It kind of depends on the brand and where they're seeing a lot of the traction come through. But it is interesting, like what you mentioned about TikTok and a brand like Pepsi really focusing some on that user-generated content feel for sure.
Right. And, the thing about these social platforms is the users that are on them expect a very specific style. A very specific kind of format that they're used to seeing their friends create, the families create. So, and you guys probably remember this, and it's happening less and less often now, but you're on Instagram, you're scrolling through stories, and then you have this really, really high-end video, and you immediately ignore it. It's almost like a flag that goes, hey, this is an ad, because it looks like an ad in the traditional sense. So it actually ended up not really working on these platforms, so in the, probably about 5 years ago, you were really seeing that a lot, and these ads were getting ignored, and the advertising people, they're very smart. They look at the analytics, how often you watched it, how much you watched it, and they saw those numbers dropping, but the spend was still really high. So then they're like, okay, well, this isn't really working. They weren't able to just take this high-end content made for broadcast TV and transition it to the Instagram story. So really, the kind of content that they have to develop to work better on this platform looks like user-created content. Even though it's still Pepsi, it needs to fit that medium, that specific platform. So you have to acknowledge which platforms you're on as well.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. It's so funny because there's some companies that still, I feel like, are kind of stuck in that more polished feel. And I swipe through right away. But then sometimes I get caught off guard and be like, wait, is this an ad or is this someone I follow?
Right. Yeah.
Really good about making it feel pretty genuine. And
yeah. And the funny thing is, and I'll bring kind of some of my past experience into this, but when I was working at Renera, shout out to the Renera guys. They're an app startup. I was with them for about a year. We were doing a lot of Snapchat content. So I was developing a lot of content for Snapchat. And, because we were spending a decent amount on the ad platforms, at a certain point, Snapchat will reach out to you and they'll go, hey, looks like you're using our platform quite a bit. Here's some tips and tricks on what works. The type of content I was creating was very animation based. So it was very fun, bubbly, lots of colors happening. And those were performing pretty well for us. But the first piece of advice that the Snapchat employee, I think he was a content specialist, something like that. He was like, hey, I love the content. It looks like it's working for you. You guys are getting downloads for the app. But I would recommend just shooting some more organic stuff straight from an iPhone that kind of goes into it and see how that performs. And that was his number one piece of advice. And I was kind of taken back a little bit because I was thinking, the higher quality I can make this, the more effective it's going to be. But it's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you have to speak the language of the platform. And that's what he said. And I'm sure they have a ton of analytics behind why that works. So one that always pops into my mind. And for me, I can kind of tell when something's an ad pretty quickly just because I'm in the industry. But you guys have probably heard of this, the Earning app. You guys heard of Earning?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they've kind of followed that ethos to a T, where it's shot on an iPhone. They try to make it as organic as they can, but then they just focus on having a clear message.
Yeah.
Kind of making it feel less ad-like and, just deploying it on the proper platforms where that makes sense. And I'm sure it's working for them because they haven't really stopped. One thing people forget is that when you're seeing ads over and over and over again, someone's paying for those. Yeah. So whatever's out there and existing and is, being rerun in a sense, it must be working out to a certain extent for them. So I've also realized to not overcomplicate the formula and always do something wildly different, because what people are spending money on more than likely is working out for them in the long term, especially if you're seeing the same kind of format over and over again.
Wow. Okay. So we've gone over a ton of content and it's really informative stuff. I want to try and wrap up a couple succinct takeaways for the viewer that just things I thought about throughout this. One is that every single business is now really required to be a media company at some level, one way or another, because as we have more and more advertising given to us as consumers, I think we get better and better at sort of the ad shield in our minds. Hector, you made an awesome 100%. Point that high production quality video now sometimes is immediately a turnoff. So because we know what we're watching, it's too transparently an ad. And it's also shown on a medium that it's clear to us that the business isn't very savvy with how the medium actually performs. So not only do we all as businesses need to find our balance between high production quality stuff and low production quality stuff to be more humanizing, more transparent and genuine, we also need to understand how to meet consumers on the platform kind of on their terms and with content that makes them feel like the business knows the platform itself and knows the dynamic of the platform as well. So I'm curious as we wrap this up to get your feedback, Hector, or your maybe just opinion on where you see this continuing to shift. Like, where do you think things are headed 5 years from now or 10 years from now with your industry and also with our industry here at Impact, where we help to insource more videographers?
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely think that, in the old days, there was this kind of argument like, well, quality versus quantity. And I think in that era, that reigned true because it was hard to make good videos. And because it was hard, the ones that looked the best really stood out and were more impactful. Well, now we've kind of seen a shift where you really need to be out there a lot more to just be, one, remembered, or two, just interacted with. During this conversation, if you were to be on LinkedIn, there's probably 100, 200, 300, who knows how many pieces of content you could have encountered that you completely missed, and then in 20 minutes from now, if someone were to post then, you interacted with that piece of content. So really the opportunity to encounter someone in the wild with content, that time has shrunk a lot. So you kind of, from a certain standpoint, you have to be producing more. So you just have the opportunity to encounter people. Now that's specific to platforms that have feeds where you can scroll by. YouTube is a little bit different, and I'm not as in tune with how YouTube functions really well. I know there's like the subscriber model, so there's that piece of building subscribers and having people interact with that kind of flow, I guess. But really, some of the best YouTubers are producing content on a regular basis that's very specific to their audiences and what they enjoy. You do have to be producing more content more often. That's kind of my opinion. And kind of what you said earlier, Will, where like from a B2B standpoint, where it is very relationship based. B2B, it's like you're looking for people that trust you and think of you as an expert in your field. So instead of just like calling someone and saying, "Hey, this is what we do," and telling them we're experts, it's almost like a show, don't tell. Like, show me that you guys are experts in this by, showing tutorials of how you do something, by showing me behind the scenes of what's going on, by talking to other people in that industry on a podcast, or pictures of being on set, or pictures of the product, or pictures of the design process. Like, people want to see more of that to show that you're doing all the right things so that you can be trusted. So I think that's going to become more and more important. Because at the end of the day, I think it's all about people knowing who you are, people trusting that you're good at what you do, and then people thinking about you when they have that specific problem. So that's something that even at Drive-Thru, we're starting to see that we need to be in front of people that utilize video production companies at a higher scale. And we need to be talking about how we do it, why we're better, who we're working with, what our end product is, how we got to that point. Some of the in-between stuff like our editing, our VFX, our voice work. There's a lot of nuances to it. And I think talking about it as much as you can and showing off what makes you really good is really important, because over time, people will develop an opinion over you and where you kind of fit in. And then when your services are needed or are called for, you kind of become the first one to pop into someone's mind.
I love that ending. I love the position right there where you say, we're all in the business of building trust here, but honestly, before you can be trusted by anybody, you have to be remembered and known by them too. So touch points. As every 100%. Business starts to find their balance between low production quality stuff with a high quantity rate, and then some of that high production quality stuff with a lower quantity rate, obviously, it's just about finding that fit and that balance that makes sense for you and your brand and your business and your prospects at the end of the day. So Hector, thank you, man, so much for coming on this podcast with FSM. If below in the description, I'm going to link to Hector's LinkedIn as well, just so in case anybody listening wants to reach out to him. I know he's an easygoing guy. I'm assuming, man, you want to take a couple of messages from some of our audience on just a couple of Q&As. And for everybody else watching, if you found this helpful, please subscribe to the channel and also like this video. If you have any questions for myself or for Mariah or for Hector, feel free to leave them in the comments. We always do read all of the comments of our videos as well and reply to as many of them as we can. And until next time, guys, keep learning. Thanks for watching.